can't pay unionized teachers to vote for you, but that's what they do. And I say this as someone who married a teacher from Michigan and who put 4 children through school. So, I don't have a lot of patience for the "you hate teachers." Oh, shut up. No, I like them enough that I married one. I don't hate teachers. I sent all my children to school. I shouldn't have, but I did. It was the law at the time. But it's not about whether or not you like teachers. It's about whether or not a government employee ought to be allowed to use tax dollars to campaign for the people who pay that employee. And that's completely illegitimate. That's totally third world. That's insane. If you have unionized teachers going door to door, campaigning in the 3-month vacation they get every year at your expense, you have by definition a corrupt system. So my question is, why doesn't someone do something about it? And I have to say of Republicans, and I vote Republican by default because I have no choice. And I'm not going to beat up on Republicans. Most people here probably vote Republican like me. But I will say an awful lot of time is spent complaining and maybe too little doing the 2 things you really need to do, and that's what I want to talk about today. You need to act, you need to speak, and you need to organize. And before you can do either one of those, you need to recognize the consequences, the stakes. It's not just about people doing things you disagree with. It's about the most fundamental question of all, which is, can you have children? Will they live in a world where they can afford to get married themselves and have children? And will those children live where you lived? Will they live within driving distance of your grave? Will the civilization that produced you continue? These are, I hate the word, but these are literally existential questions. Will the world that produced you continue to exist? And the answer is no. With bad leadership, it won't. Everything is at stake. And that's not a fundraising pitch. It's not one of those direct mail things you get, send us $20 or your grandchildren will die. It's the truth. It's the truth. If people in Michigan feel like they can't live here, then the odds are your children and grandchildren won't. And the life that you've so enjoyed and that you've made possible for them, working every day, will not continue. And you'll do what Americans for the last couple of generations have done. You'll just leave. You'll run away. You'll go to Florida. You'll move somewhere else. We got to move out of Detroit. It blows up in 1967, and like half the people who live there are like, that's it. We're moving to Macomb and Oakland counties. Which I get. I'm not judging at all. I mean, of course, I'm married to someone whose family did that. And I'm sure half the people in this audience had family who did that. But at a certain point, you wonder, can you keep running away? And at a certain point, is there anywhere to go? And the answer is no. And why should you? They turned the world that you grew up in, that you love, that you contributed to, into something you don't recognize, and you're like, all right, I'm out? Really? Doesn't seem very American to me. And by the way, at this point, you're kind of out of options anyway. There's no guarantee that anything stays the same. And the only way to ensure that it does is to stay and fight for it with the knowledge that if you don't, you could lose it for real. I mean, it would be so interesting to know the number of people in this audience who had grandparents who lived in the city of Detroit in 1966, right? Exactly. A third or half the crowd. And they don't live there now because they can't, because it's dangerous and it's dysfunctional. You can't use the schools. But if your grandparents are still alive, it'd be interesting to ask them, what was 8th grade like in a public school in Detroit? And they would say it was great. I went to Latin class every Wednesday. Really? You studied Latin in a public school in Detroit? Yes, we did. Detroit was one of the richest cities in the world. It helped build this country. And then in one summer, it disappeared. And it disappeared not simply because you had riots in the summer of '67 in Detroit, but because the productive people who lived there left. And that was a huge boon to Macomb and Oakland counties, but it completely destroyed the city of Detroit. Your grandparents built those brick buildings that are being reclaimed by the prairie right now. And as you drive through Detroit, and I always drive through Detroit, every time I visit my wife's family, I drive through Detroit every single time. And every single time I'm left with the exact same thought, which was, this is a magnificent place. This is an unbelievable city. This is fundamentally one of the prettiest places in America. The buildings are unbelievable. The abandoned buildings are unbelievable. And the beauty of Detroit, it's a little bit like Pompeii, because it happened in one day or 1 week, the riots of '67. I remember the first story I ever did, not to get sidetracked, but I did it in Detroit. There was a guy called Keith Butler who was on the city council, and I went to interview him in 1991. And his church was in a rough part of the city. Well, the whole city's rough, but the roughest part of the city. And I was driving in a cab to go interview him. And there was a building we drove by, and on the second floor was an ad for Cool cigarettes, and it said 25 cents a pack. And that sign had been there since the summer of '67 when that store was burned and closed. It was like frozen in time. And so that's the beautiful thing about driving through Detroit as opposed to New York or Chicago, cities that have been torn down and rebuilt countless times. Detroit just stopped. So as you drive through that city, you can tell what it was like on the day it burned. And it was an incredible place. Incredible. And the people there just left. They just left. And I guess what I'm saying again is we're running out of cities to run from. You think you're going to be safe in your suburb when HUD mandates density? When there's Section 8 in your neighborhood, which is coming? Because you're not safe in your suburb, actually. You're not. And next will be the rural area. I live in a town of 100 people. Why do I do that? Because I got sick of living in a city. Because I'm a coward, I guess. I should have stayed. Everyone went insane with the BLM riots and then COVID. And I said to my wife, and our kids were grown, I was like, we're out of here. We're moving to a town of 100 people where everyone open carries and there's no violent crime whatsoever. And yes, people do drink in the morning. That's true. The Congresswoman has raised her glass. But it's a humane and polite world. And I didn't want to deal with the rage that we saw all around us in a big city. And I feel much happier, of course, driving around with my dogs in that town, but I also feel correctly like I ran away from something and I should have stayed and fought. I was in that city for 35 years. But I think that this will be obvious to everybody in America. There's literally no place to go. Where you are now is probably the best it's ever gonna be. It could get a whole lot worse, and you need to do everything you can to prevent that. And if that means that your life is gonna be more uncomfortable for the time being, or you face greater risks, Dana Nessel decides to send you to prison. All right, that's the price. It's a smaller price than your ancestors paid. You can have a system that nobody actually supports except the people directly benefiting from it. This is the main thing I've learned in the past 5 years that I'm 54, I've lived in this country my whole life, and because I, unlike everyone else in Washington, actually kind of believed in the basic premise of democracy, which is the majority rules. That's the most basic fact of democracy. The people run their own government. If you get a majority of people to vote for something, that's now the law. And that's totally untrue. In the end, most governments are run by a small group of people for their own benefit without reference to what the majority wants. And I hate to believe that that's true in this country, but all the evidence suggests that it is. So people are leaving Michigan because it's very hard to make a living here, and you're constantly hassled by a government that never stops growing and that is leeching off an economy that hasn't grown in decades, okay? That's the truth. Take a look at the priorities of the low IQ lunatic who's running your state. Gretchen Whitmer, who deserves zero respect, no respect. Her priorities are what? Putting you in jail if you, quote, misgender somebody? What percentage of the population of the state of Michigan, even southeastern Michigan, is on board with that as a top concern? It's like roughly around 1/10%, okay, in that range. The things that people care about, Gretchen Whitmer couldn't care less about. How many Texans do you think are all on board with letting 7 million people cross into their state illegally? What percentage? Zero. I don't care what your race or national origin, nobody is for that. That's insane. Has the governor of Texas done anything meaningful to stop that? No. The Republican governor? He's got a National Guard. He's the commander-in-chief of the National Guard, and it's Texas, so they're all large. And they have double-stack magazines in their sidearms. You think they couldn't stop that in a week if they, of course. Just assemble along the border. We're not doing this. No, he refuses to do that. He won't do it. And it's not like no one suggested. I've suggested to him 3 times, including in private at a cocktail party in Dallas last year. What are you doing, man? Don't you have a National Guard? Why don't you seal the border? Oh, it's very complicated. No, it's not. No, it's not. If someone's trying to break into my house, It's not complicated to repel the person. Do you have a firearm or don't you? Are you willing to defend your house and your children or aren't you? You're lying to me. You don't want to do it because your donors don't want you to do it. It's that simple. Greg Abbott. Liar. Liar. And worse than liar, betrayer of your own people. That's what that is. But the point is, if you assume that just because everybody wants something, you're going to get it, think again, pal. It's very likely that, in fact, you won't get anything that you want. You will just pay for what a small group of other people want. They are destroying the country, whether it's on purpose or not, is immaterial. It does not matter. They are doing it, and everyone passively sits back as if it's not happening. And if you continue to passively sit back as if it's not happening, what's going to happen? Will it decelerate or accelerate? Yeah, those of you who have served in prison know. First, they cut in front of you in line, okay? It doesn't get better from there. Then they sell you for a pack of cigarettes. You got to say, stop. You cannot treat me this way. This is not your country, it's mine. Period. You are stronger in a group. And this is exactly why the Biden administration has handed out 20 and 25-year prison sentences to people who didn't actually do anything in the last week on January 6th. Why? Because they were in some group that was probably at least half federal agents, but whatever. The idea of people being organized, of coming together with a common purpose is terrifying. So if I were trying to figure out what to do in Michigan, I'd go right to the problem, which is your teachers union. It's really simple. And it's hard for conservatives to do that because they're very easily intimidated by moral aggression. You see this in the gun debate time after time. So if someone comes to you and says, we're going to hike up the crime rate to a point where you have a non-zero chance of getting murdered, but we're going to take away means of defending yourself, you'd be like, no, I don't think so. But that's not what they do. They say, guns are bad, guns kill people, it's gun violence. Yeah, gun violence, okay. I live in a town with 100% gun ownership, and there's no violence. It's also 100% chainsaw ownership. And there are very few chainsaw-related crimes in my county. But they'll get right in your face and say, guns are the problem, and if you care about children, people who have no children will lecture you, who have many children, about the children. Oh, the children, well, I love children, I've got 4 of them, I want to help the children. It's like, you are speaking in bad faith, you want to control me. Leave. Don't be intimidated. And if I were approaching Michigan, I would say, let's find a billionaire, and let's spend the money not on 30-second ads, we're going to spend it destroying the teachers union in Michigan. It is disgusting that government employees get to rig the system in favor of the people who pay them. It's really that simple. There's no reason that people who preside over a system that doesn't actually teach kids to read, if you are in any way connected to the Detroit public school system, you have no moral authority at all. None. Zero. And nobody says that. These people are criminals. What they're doing is totally immoral, and they should never be allowed to walk in public with their head held high. There are people who are going to jail for non-trivial lengths. By the way, anyone who's ever been to a jail knows, and there are a bunch of sheriffs here, and they know best of all, any time in jail is not trivial. Any time behind bars. A drunk driving offense for a night can change your life. You don't want to go to jail. Period. It's not a joke. And anyone who tells you, oh, he's going to Club Fed where they have volleyball, right. Taking away a person's freedom and locking him in a cage where he can't see the stars at night is, short of killing him, maybe more than killing him, the gravest thing you can do to another human being. So no one should ever minimize the penalty of prison time or jail time. It's profound. It'll destroy you and your family. And they're sending people to prison for saying that the last election was rigged, which it was. So, oh, how can you say the last election was rigged? Well, when the country's largest law enforcement organization, the FBI, actively works on behalf of one political party, and when its largest intelligence gathering agency, the CIA, does the same, it's a little bit like what's happening in Michigan. when federal employees paid for by the tax dollars of everyone take an aggressive position on the side of one political party, you can't have a fair election because you're using public money to put your thumb on the scale on behalf of a partisan cause. It is totally immoral. So for saying that out loud, people are going to prison. And of course, the whole point is to convince you not to say it out loud. So don't let them. That's the only point. Don't let them. And if you keep telling the truth, some of you probably get indicted by Dana Nessel. Woo-woo. Well, you're going to women's prison, a little better. But still prison. But it's worth it. Anyway, don't be intimidated. Your children's future depends on your bravery. Tell the truth.